Hello, good evening. I would, on behalf of AACE Brazil section and the RBF, I would like to welcome you to the 7th panel of the Dispute Board Latin American Awareness Program. As I said, this is our 7th panel, and we are going to debate dispute resolution boards, lessons from experiences in Europe and Latin America. Just for you to know, next week, on next Wednesday, more precisely, we will have our last panel of the awareness program. And for you to subscribe, just go to the DRBF website, and there you will find all the required information for that. Today, I would like to welcome as our guests, Peter Caminga. He is a neutral with more than 20 years of experience as an international mediator, arbitrator, DRB member, and resolver of complex disputes in the US, Europe, and globally. He has successfully resolved hundreds of complex disputes involving multiple parties, sophisticated questions of law, and aggregated values of millions or billions of dollars, involving a variety of sectors, including the energy, construction, and real estate industries, as well as financial, tech, and healthcare. Our other guest is Augusto Barros de Figueiredo, a Brazilian lawyer, partner at Barros de Figueiredo's Advogados, specialized in construction law, actively working as an arbitrator, mediator, and dispute board member. He is serving as an outreach director at the RBF Region 4 board, and he is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators and PhD candidate at the Federal Fluminense University in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Welcome. Thank you very much for your time and for your participation here with us today. And just for our audience to know, we decided to have a more dynamic debate, and I will address some questions for our guests. And if you also have some questions, please use our Q&A tool here. Then I will collect the questions and then I will direct to our guests. So as an introductory question, I would like to ask you first for Peter and then to Augusto. What's your background and what's your experience with relationship to DRBs?
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Adriana. Yeah, so as you just introduced, I'm a mediator and an arbitrator, as well as a dispute board member, both in Europe and in the US. And my relationship with DRBs is kind of threefold, actually. It came to my attention many years ago when I was still mostly active in academia. I have a little side activity in academia and doing some teaching at Harvard in the US. And one of the things that brought me there was actually a PhD. I heard that Augusto is also working on a PhD. I did that as well at the time. And one of the topics were dispute boards. And I found that they were very effective, actually, compared to other dispute resolution mechanisms, particularly in the construction industry. So I studied up on them. I got really interested in them and read a lot about it. Then later on, I actually started being a member of a dispute board, and I've done it in Europe as well as currently in the US. One of them is a tunnel project that I'll tell a bit more about later, and the other one is a number of infrastructure projects. And my third link, or my third relationship with the topic of dispute boards, is that I've been drafting clauses for DRBs as well as the Dutch DRB regulations. So I've been thinking about how do you set it up in an efficient way to make it as efficient as and effective as possible. So I have these three kind of relationships to it, and I have to say I'm pretty enthusiastic about it. If it's well done, I think dispute boards can really make a difference.
And Augusto, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, thank you, Adriana. Hi, Peter. Hi, Anne. Hi, everybody. From my side, my first contact with the IRBF was back in 2013, around that, when I was in charge of structuring dispute resolution system for the Olympic Games in Brazil. And I was searching for something more effective than arbitration, that the structure of the arbitration clause and institution, everything that was already set in the very beginning of the project. And then I heard about dispute boards, and then I started to getting more information, and then luckily I met my nowadays very good friends. First, some good friends from Brazil that was already in the market, already discussing about dispute boards, and since then I've been working very actively, not only in Brazil with discussions on writing and with webinars and everything else, but also being part of the board at Region 2, now board of Region 4, and then really actively working to develop the method with in very good companion as always.
And you mentioned the Olympic dispute boards that were, I guess it was the very beginning of the dispute boards here in Brazil. And what do you think that justifies, that motivates people using the DRBs? How do you describe the DRBs? What's your impression on this issue, and how does it differ in relation to other ADRs?
You mean in the project, right? The idea in the very beginning? Or in general, no? Right, yeah. I thought you were talking about the use in the Olympic project, but in fact, is a general impression, right? That DRBs are the only method that happens in real time, and not just only happens in real time, but we are, as DRB members, we are part of this movie. We know the people, we know the projects, we've been working on it for years, right? In the best model, best way to have a DB since the very beginning. So it's completely different from our work as a dispute resolution professional when we work in mediation or in arbitration. Even in mediation, we can't see things happening in real time and have the chance, the opportunity to intervene, to help people really when things are going on, right? And this kind of superpower that we have to move the project forward it's a very good feeling that we have for as professionals to watch things being done and have this perception of being part of the solution, right?
Peter, what's your view?
Yeah. What similar to what Augusto said, it's to me a dispute resolution board is one to several to 5 up to sometimes 12 experts that together follow along with the project right from the start. I think that's unique about it. They get installed or set up at the beginning of a project. Ideally, they follow along so they know everything, what's going on. They'll do site visits every couple of months and help parties to prevent and resolve any disputes that arise. Right? That's the core of it, what it is to me. And there's different versions of it. You can do it in lots of different ways, but I think that's kind of what it comes down to. And the main characteristics is that's particularly the fact that you're doing this monthly, 3 monthly or 4 monthly check up on the project, and you're basically staying involved. Some people compare it to a kind of an insurance policy at the beginning of a project, right? You would cover a project, find insurance for it just in case. To me, it's a similar type of, you have these experts that are there. If you need them, they know they're up to date on stuff. And that's kind of what it is to me. That's the unique, what I think makes it unique compared to any other ADR forms, where only when there is a dispute, Then you got to go find the people. And then they got to get up to speed on what's going on. And here you already have them, right? You have them on call basically. And if everything goes well, hopefully you never need them, right? The preventative effect of dispute boards is apparently very good, right? So ideally you don't have any disputes, but if you do, you just give them a call and they're there to help you resolve it.
Here in Brazil, I guess it's kind of related with the development of the dispute board as an institute internally here, but we have a difference between what we call the ad hoc dispute boards and the permanent dispute boards. The ad hoc dispute boards are the ones that are like spot decisions for issues that have already happened, and it's kind of common that our clients prefer to use such kind of dispute board. I guess maybe for some reasons of familiarity, but specifically in this case, a question that is very frequently asked by clients to me is, what's the difference between an ad hoc dispute board and an arbitration? Peter.
That's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of, I'd say, similarities. I'm most familiar with the standing boards, right, as opposed to the ad hoc boards. I guess ad hoc boards, as arbitrators, need to read up on it and get up to speed because they haven't followed it from the beginning. I do think there's, depending on how you organize your dispute board, but there's more flexibility in the roles. What I've seen in Europe, for instance, on what the dispute board can do. Right? They can provide an expert opinion, they can provide a non-binding opinion, they can provide some kind of facilitation. So there's, at least the way it's used in Europe, is that there's more variability, that you can adapt to what the parties need, the type of disputes at hand, to what you can provide as a dispute resolution mechanism, as opposed to arbitration, where it's pretty much set in stone. You'll have your arbitration rules. I think all in all, it's a little more formal, where the ad hoc dispute board has some more flexibility in terms of timing, in terms of what the board actually gonna do and how quickly they're gonna move and what types of process they're gonna use, right? Generally, that will be agreed in the contract, right? What the dispute board can do. But I think the main difference is it provides more flexibility as well as in process, as in actual contents of what they'll do. But I'm curious to see what Augusto thinks about that.
Augusto,
Yes,
please.
thank you, Adriana, and I totally agree with you, Peter. In my experience, the beauty, if you can say like that, of this ad hoc dispute board, of course, clearly preferring the permanent board, right? Because in this kind of boards, we really get engaged in the project. We know what's going on. We are really capable of preventing dispute. But if we are just speaking about the difference between arbitration to ad hoc, I believe that flexibility gives us as board members a great power to go deeper, searching for facts, right? Most of the rules, AACE rules and some others, allows the board to have the total control of the procedure. So we can go deeper. In my experience, we have many times we had like a hearing, presentation of the parties, and then we as the board discussed about what we heard during the presentations, and we really want to go deeper on a specific point. So we called the parties and organized an additional meeting to discuss specifically that subject. So, and we know that this is very difficult in arbitration. So, but at the same time, it's important for us, our board members, that we have this flexibility to really be very aware of the control of the procedure, what's going on, to allow the powers to have the equal of armies, right? And so this way we do not harm or manage the procedure itself, right? But it's all about the flexibility for my opinion too.
Perfect. I will just leave a message to Avi. I have seen your question. I will just wait a little moment to ask it, because I will join with another question that I will ask later. In this point of the procedure, I would like to ask you what kind of rules have you seen being applied? Normally the dispute boards that you are experiencing, they are under an institutional DRBs, or they are autonomous DRBs? What's your experience in terms of the procedural rules? Augusto, I guess you may start this time.
Okay. Well, that's a good point to discuss, to mention, as in that webinar, we're talking about difference, right? Comparison between different practices. It's interesting that in Latin America, it's growing the trendy of using administered dispute boards. That means you have arbitral institutions supporting administratively the dispute boards. What helps a lot us, like as dispute board members, also the parties, that gives also transparency to the procedure, that it's related to many issues that we discuss actively or mostly in public projects in Latin America. And so being so, as we have that practice in development, we are most of the time using the rules of those institutions, right? But I see the use of ICC rules very frequently, especially in projects in Peru. In Brazil, the boards I had, they have been under the rules of those institutions. And sometimes in FIDIC projects, we have all the set of rules there. And that's it. From the point of Latin America, that's my overall impression. How about you, Peter?
Yeah, it is definitely a good question. When I started doing dispute boards back in Europe, there were not that many rules developed yet. So I remember one of the first projects, it was really inventing it as you were going. It just came over from the US, right? The dispute resolution boards were kind of invented in the US in terms of it used a lot in the 80s there. So it kind of came over to Europe with that idea, like, oh, it's working well in the US, let's do this, let's try this out. So it was one of the first boards. And so there wasn't a lot of institutional regulations formed yet. The ICC hadn't came up with it yet. And afterwards, a couple of European organizations developed their own rules. At the time, there wasn't. So we kind of copied the US rules and then adjusted it to the Dutch. At the time, it was in the Netherlands, and the Dutch kind of context. And I have to say, I wouldn't recommend that looking back. So because I think, particularly if it's new, and it's still relatively new in many countries, right? It's not a bad idea to use an institutional administrative board with, for instance, the ICC rules, or any other institution that has been thinking about these rules, has been designing the dispute board rules and have a particular philosophy behind it. And if they also provide the administrative backup to it, that's not a bad thing. At the time, we had a secretary to the board that was kind of figuring it all out. We definitely needed that, right? Because as it was new and we had to figure it out. I've seen that experience going well in Europe and on a project that I happened to be on. I don't think it was because I was on there. I think we just got lucky. But similar, it was part of a larger project. It was caught up in separate projects, basically a large program, separate projects. So our neighbors, basically neighbor projects, also had dispute boards, and there it wasn't going that great because it was new, because it wasn't very established. People didn't really knew what was expected of them. So we had some lawyers on those boards that were basically treating it as an arbitration and were very formal. So it didn't work out that well. And I think that is a risk when you're trying this out and you're trying to figure it out all by yourself. Well, then maybe falling back on some institutions that have a set of rules in place, that have administration in place, could be a good thing. So I think it definitely has some advantages.
Peter, in which cases would you recommend, let's say, a tailor-made set of rules instead of institutional rules?
Well, at the time, for instance, that example, the rules, you have common law, you have civil law, like, so there's a, I think my point is that you want to adapt it to the culture. If it has worked well in one culture, and for instance, in the common law culture where the dispute resolution boards came from, you cannot just copy that, right? And it may be the same for rules that are being developed by an institution in a particular country where it's working very well, but you're in a different country, so you wanna do it differently. So I think different culture, different setting, unique project that is different than anything else. You might want to think of, I would definitely bring in some experts, right? If you say we need tailor-made rules, we need a tailor-made system, definitely bring in some people that have done it before, that can help you think through all the risks and advantages of different, different ways you can go. So I think anything, if you feel it's unique, if it's unique circumstances, cultural, legally, and depending on the type of contracts, I would probably suggest, may want to see if the standard rules are the best for you. If you need to tailor it with help of some experts.
Another point that you mentioned, Peter, that in my opinion, it has a great influence in the whole procedure of the dispute board is the composition of the members. You mentioned that, for example, having too many lawyers may turn the procedure a little bit more rigid. So I would like to ask first, Augusto, regarding our experience here in Latin America, how is that being practiced? How is the composition of the arbitral tribunal of the DRB being practiced? And I will address also AV's question, that is the following. We see experts having variable opinions on delays and damages cases. Does it make sense to have one expert for each specialty as part of DRB so that everyone agrees technically on what happened?
Yeah, just a quick comment on the previous questions when Peter was making this point. I totally agree with him. In a specific project and very unique, we truly could consider something new. But I remember instantly when I have a conversation with Bob Rubin, one of the founders of the DRBF, about structuring new things. And he remembered the KISS rule, right? To keep it simple, stupid, right? And we should always remember that, because with dispute boards, we have a good set of rules that allows us as dispute board members to do our job and to deliver the best that the parties can have in prevention and decisions. It's enough, right? You have a good DB in place with something simple and that had already proven its use. That's my impression. About the composition of boards. From my experience, I've been more and more convinced that, of course, it's good to have truly a very experienced professional that is very well known and very active in one specific thing in the industry. But more than that, we need that as a colleague in the board, we need the experience of all the members in projects in general, right? In contract management in general, in experience with problems in projects, because if we have a very specific problem that we truly need a very unique professional, maybe we can call that professional. Of course, there's a wider discussion about experts in DB, the time of preparing reports, everything else, but not considering not considering this complexity, I believe that for the profile of the DB members, an overall experience will be more welcome. Exception made for very complex projects like the it escapes me the name of the project of nuclear fusion in Kadahashi in France. It's I can't remember now, but more complex projects like airports and maybe this project of a nuclear power plant that we really need more than 3 professionals, and we can call them depending on the case that's being analyzed, that's in discussion. In this case, yes, but in general, for ordinary boards, I believe that an overall experience will be more effective for the projects.
I will address you a hard question. Do you think a lawyer is necessary as a member to assure procedimental regularity and all those things?
Yeah, definitely. Not because I'm a lawyer. I believe that the multidisciplinarity of the board is very important. So if you can have one lawyer to have a special look on the procedure, on protecting the bureaucracy in general that we have in preparations of decisions, everything else, and for also protecting for other lawyers too. That's important to consider. So if we can have 1 and 2 technical members or engineers or what specialty they are, I believe that's important, and it's very useful for the project. I definitely believe in that.
Peter, what's your opinion?
Yeah, no, I agree on that last part. Do we need lawyers in a dispute board? I'm afraid we do. Yeah, I love my engineer colleagues on boards because it kind of creates a nice balance, because they always tend to be very practical, also very much interested in the technical details. Where I think the lawyer provides more. I think, as Augusto also points out, if it comes to decisions, that they're that everything is well founded, that we are, make sure we act as neutral. So, like, I think a lawyer may have more of a natural tendency to kind of, stay aware of that. And sometimes they're also just more contractual issues, right? So it's not only what I've seen in board. It's not only technical. It can be very legal technical. Right, so I think it's helpful, and oftentimes in Europe, I don't know how it is in Latin America, the chair is actually has a legal background for that reason, kind of to organize a process and make sure that all the dots are the T's are crossed and the I have a dot on it. So that's that on that question. Then the composition, I think I've seen it from. In Europe, the smaller projects, you sometimes have 1 member, right? So a board existing of 1, so it's more like a project neutral than a board. And I've seen it up to 12 people. For instance, the London Olympics. That's an example where they had not only a dispute adjudication board, but also kind of an independent dispute kind of prevention board, which was existing of 12 people, which I initially thought, oh, wow, that's a lot of people. How do you even manage that? Do you need that many? But as they were covering all the projects, not only infrastructure, but also kind of the financing, the whole kind of all the aspects of the Olympics. I guess in that unique project, it made sense, right? It was, billions and billions of dollars, and under high time pressure, of course, but I guess you have a similar experience in Brazil. So there they chose for a very elaborate board with a lot of people with different expertises, and they would pull them in when there was a dispute. So you do have that choice. So there's an advantage to that you have every expertise basically at your service. I think in most, and agree with that, Augusto, in most projects, you won't need that level of sophistication in so many different unique expertises. And you could do it with people that are a little more generalists, and can cover, they still got to have the technical expertise, but you may not need those on the average project. At least you might not need that level of unique expertise. What I've seen in many of still of the projects in Europe, there are these $1 billion+ projects, so they tend to be very big. So with those budgets and that complexity, maybe you do have the space to have some more members and set it all up, because there's the transaction cost of setting it up is of course also a factor, right? That, and also a factor why still a lot of parties on project hesitate of using it, because it seems very complex. You got to set up this whole board and you got to do all that, got to select people. So I think there's the trade-off as well of, on the one hand, wanting as more expertise could be practical to have. On the other hand, if you make it very elaborate, it becomes quite a thing to set it up and organize it all.
Peter, you mentioned that this dispute board in London, I guess, it had 12 members.
Yeah, there was an independent advice. There were two levels of the board, basically. There was I forgot the name. I think independent board of, it was kind of like the early on preventative function. And then next to that, they had the dispute adjudication board, where the board members actually would make a ruling, right, that would be binding for the time of the project. So they had basically a tiered process.
Because my question was how did you manage to get the decisions or recommendation with an even number of members?
Well, they basically used that as they were not on every issue 12 people were involved. They kind of used it as a panel of, hey, we have this issue in this technical field, so we're gonna pick these 3 people. So they were kind of making sub-selections depending on the issue from that group. So everybody was kept up to date on everything, but when there would really be an issue, a subcommittee basically would kind of take it on. So then they would make sure there would be an uneven number.
Yes, as far as I remember, they had a very unique structure. It was like a governance dispute board. Everything ends up in that board, like a filter before. It's very, very unique, very different, and very well structured, right? Yeah,
definitely not the average board. I think it's still unique in the world. That so in that sense. Again, that level of sophistication, but they decided to do it like it. That was an example of a tailor-made thing where they put in all the efforts and thought it all out.
Exactly.
And I think it worked pretty well. No.
On these issues, still on this issue, what kind of dispute board have you most commonly see? The adjudication, recommendation, or the hybrid? Augusto, you may answer first.
For my part, 100% adjudication boards. Working in projects in Latin America, I only worked in dispute adjudication projects, and I'm not aware about recommendation boards, and that's a very, very important difference. Remembering also my conversation with Bob Rumby, I remember when he mentioned it, that only recommendation boards were truly dispute boards. Of course, we can understand that from the nature of dispute boards, and that says a lot about the cultural difference, right? And that's a very good side decision on that.
Yeah, I've seen them both, because I work both in the US as well as in Europe. In Europe, it's much more adjudication. US they're kind of known for the recommendation, the resolution boards with providing recommendations. And I understand. And again, what you say, Augusto, that has very much to do with the culture, right? Where it works in the US, right? Because of the legal culture, because of just the recommendation of some high, reputable people with a lot of experience. That has a lot of weight, and people will follow it even when it's not binding. because they say, well, first out of efficiency, they kind of trust these people. They know what they're doing. They have this reputation. So when they'll say it, then we'll follow this recommendation. So they don't really need the enforceability aspect of it. In Europe, it doesn't, and that may be a common law, civil law difference. I don't know where it comes from or just cultural, but in Europe, it's much more adjudication. I've been in boards where we had multiple functions that parties could choose, and that's also something under ICC rules, where parties could basically choose what do we want from the board, right? Do we want them to provide a non-binding opinion, or do we provide them to even like mediate something, or do we want like a more binding thing? But still, what I've seen the most in Europe is more the adjudication. People want if they can't figure it out themselves, they feel we can negotiate a deal, we can negotiate a solution. So let's have an expert tell us what to do and not advise us, because then we may still fight over if we're going to follow that advice, if we like it or not. We just need somebody or a board say, this is what we decide, this is what we think should happen, and then the decision is basically binding, so people can move on. There's no doubt about, and I noticed that's that I think a lot of it is a cultural differences, where one thing works in the US, other thing works better in Europe, and if I understand you well in Augusto, so it's similar in Brazil.
And Peter, in your experience with recommendations, are they usually respected, voluntarily respected, or is it necessary to enforce them after an arbitration?
Yeah, no, most of the time they are respected. What I've seen, right? I haven't seen all the numbers on it, and I guess that depends on who you select, right? You want to be sure for that system to work. You want to be sure you select you put together a board that has the respect and of everybody involved, because you can imagine if one side is kind of doubting the credentials, or is doubting if the person has this unique expertise that you need to resolve that dispute, or together they can figure it out, then that whole system start to kind of potentially fall apart. But generally there are respected people that just, when they say it, they'll follow it.
I have some experience here in Brazil with recommendation dispute boards, but they are how can I say, they are not so beautiful. My experience in particular is with the government. They are a little bit afraid of having a binding decision of a that is not an arbitration or a court decision. So they condition acceptance on the dispute board on not being binding, since there were some doubts by, let's say, it's not regulatory agencies, but fiscalization entities here. And this is a little bit different in Brazil. So I would like to, Augusto, if you want to make some comments. My next question would be, how do the government entities face the DRBs in both of your experiences? Augusto, you may start, and then Peter comments.
Yes, still in the previous question, I remember here when I had one board that I served as it was a combined dispute board, and I delivered 2 recommendations. But it was interesting because as it was a combined dispute board, the parties were free to ask the board the kind of decision they wanted. And in a very good moment, 2 very good moments of the project, they decided to ask for a recommendation, agreeing that they will follow the recommendation and everything else. And it worked out very well. But in a specific case, in the same project, lately, in a more complex moment of the project, we start issuing decisions. So it also can work to consider the relation of the parties. About the use of specific kinds of types of dispute boards in from the part of the government in public projects. I believe that even more in Brazil, and I believe that everywhere in Latin America, definitely we will have DABs. I can't imagine, at least at that specific moment of the history, government truly believing and confident about the decision of the boards to ask for a recommendation. I really believe that we need an adjudication board, even more because it's the nature of the board of having a dispute board to move projects forward, right? And if you have a recommendation, at least in the American style, right, will not be very effective. And why I am mentioning the American kind of recommendation, because if we check the AACE rules, the difference from from decisions to recommendations, the difference is the moment that this decision should be respected and applied, right? For recommendations, we have 30 days for the notice of dissatisfaction, and after that, if the parties don't send this notice, the decision is obligatory, and the recommendation is obligatory. And about the decisions, it's in the zero. So if it's a ICC or also most of the rules of arbitral institutions in Latin America, those rules follows this line of thought of ICC. So, but even so, I believe that governments will follow the choice for an adjudication board more than even a combined dispute board. I believe so.
Peter.
Yeah, what I've seen in, or what I've been involved in Europe is that they are in favor of, they have been trying it out. They're basically the parties that have seen the most. I mean, particularly in construction, right? It's typical the infrastructure works where dispute boards have been used, and they like the adjudication version the most, what I've seen in Europe, because it just, it gives that finality, at least for the time of the project, right? You can still appeal it in theory afterwards, but it gives that ability to move on. There's a decision made and people can move on. And sometimes, and I think that's an aspect too that may particularly be relevant for government organizations, I think Europe, is that to kind of accept it, to accept the recommendation is it's a little bit like it's not like mediation, but at least you're choosing to accept it, right? And sometimes I think particularly for government organizations, it's easier, kind of unlike what you just described, Adriana. Maybe in Europe it's a little different, but that they rather have a decision made. So they haven't given up. You know what I mean? That's the thing with the recommendation. If you can still appeal it and you don't, that means you didn't use your right to kind of get it in your direction. So I think that's a factor in Europe. Like the adjudication is in European government contracts preferred. I know in the US it's different. A lot of them have even combinations with partnering, right? Like partnering contracts and dispute boards, where it's actually they really stress the whole being collaborative and just using recommendations and trying to even prevent everything is very present, at least in a couple of states in the US, in California, Wisconsin, the state agreements, the infrastructure agreements for the state, Caltrans in California, for instance, uses that But they're really on the other side of let's collaborate, let's resolve this as quickly as possible. We don't need anything enforceable. Keep that kind of collaborative spirit and have a board give a recommendation, and that's enough for us, and we move on. So it's a little, again, I think it's a little bit of a cultural, common law, civil law difference, and whatever works best, right? It's that's kind of the beauty of it, that it provides that flexibility. You have different forms, different models to use.
Perfect. Now I will address, there's a question here from Guilherme. He asks the following. Good evening. Would you say that the existence of statutory adjudication, like in the UK, is something that is taken into account by the parties when looking at the role of the DRBs and when deciding the profile of its members? Who would like to answer first?
I'm happy to say something about that. It definitely has an impact in the UK. It's even, some say that the fact that they have statutory adjudication, which is somewhat similar than, you're already providing for adjudication, so you don't need dispute adjudication boards. That actually, some say that the fact that it exists in the UK, there's actually less use of it, of adjudication board. I don't know if that's the case. I mean, the Olympics was definitely a difference, but having that present, it probably will influence or may sway people, particularly in the UK, to use adjudication as more education boards than resolution boards. And I guess they're looking at people that fit that profile well. I can imagine. Again, the London Olympics with their independent kind of pre-board, right? They try to prevent things, was kind of unique. I think the adjudication is definitely something that in the UK is more common.
Augusto.
Yeah, just a quick comment that, of course, if you can have in the board a well-known adjudicator or a professional with this adjudication capacity, it's great. But I believe that we must bear in mind that dispute board members need a larger set of abilities, right? Like the soft skills and everything else. Most of the time, we are preventing disputes. Sometimes we have to really adjudicate disputes, and so that's one very important point to search for the profiles of dispute board members. So not just good adjudicators or good arbitrators with practice in construction disputes, but also some mediation skills, capacity that we can bring to the board and use it with under the rules, of course.
I agree with Augusto, and one of the things that also I find is important in board members is that they're able to see problems that are not there yet, right? So you're ready. That prevention function is very important. I mean, I think, in my view, if a dispute resolution board works in the best way, it prevents everything. You'll never have a dispute because your board members help to identify that, hey, did you think of this? That issue may come along. Be careful of that. That just literally think along with parties and maybe even give advice in that sense. And that definitely, as Augusto says, that's a whole different skill than what an adjudicator has. You need a broader set of broader skill set. Yeah.
You both mentioned some skills of the members of the dispute boards and some characteristics of the parties. For example, Peter mentioned the collaboration. And this leads me to the question of what are the key factors for having a successful DRB or a successful DAB, if there is any difference between the two types of dispute boards. Augusto, you may start.
Okay, thank you. I believe that the collaboration spirit is truly the most needed characteristic for any dispute board, because if the parties are just using dispute boards because it was in the contract, they have been forced to use it, they will not allow the board to work really effectively in the prevention of dispute. They will not trust in the eventual decisions. The informal assistance, everything, every single ability and technique that we can use in the board will not be effective. So we must have parties able and willing to collaborate and to properly use dispute boards in the projects.
Peter.
Yeah, I agree with that point of like the selection process. That's also what I had I was thinking of first. If you say like what determines the success, there's different ways to do it, right? In selection, what I've seen to be very successful is to kind of use the kind of the strike list approach. So, which basically makes that every board member is acceptable to both sides, which is already a first hurdle, right? Where in some other selection mechanisms, each party may choose a neutral, and then that neutral would select the chairman. But I think having all the board members being acceptable and respected by both sides, and I think the amount of site visits that's a success factor as well. What I like to in terms of frequency is every like 3-4 months, because again, then parties get to know you. You get to know all the players. You develop a level of trust, a level of respect, and I think that again goes to the collaboration that Augusto mentioned. The spirit of collaboration around these boards, I think, is a big factor in its success. And another one, I think, is the role that kind of the expectation management of what is the board going to do, particularly when it's new, when people are new to it. Don't confuse it with arbitrators that come, because I've seen that in Europe where project participants would think, why is this board coming? What are they actually doing here? Why are they? We don't have any issues. Why are they come to, look in our kitchen? So if that hasn't been kind of laid out, and if you have kind of the wrong personalities where people come in and are all formal and all like arbitrator like, that's not you're not setting yourself up for success. So I think, who do you select? Are they acceptable? And does everybody know what's expected and how a dispute board functions? I think those are very important for the success.
So as a last question, I would like to ask you to share with us a good experience and a bad experience, and the reasons for being good and for being bad. Peter, you may start.
Okay. I'll start with the good. Well, I'll start with the bad experience, and that's an experience I didn't have myself, but I know happened I've seen it from close, and that is kind of that example where that people kind of goes on over my earlier point, where kind of both those points where one side felt that a dispute board was kind of forced on them, that it was the idea of the government agency that which was a little bit true, where they said we're going to do dispute boards on all our projects, where the contractors saying, well, what is this dispute board thing? Why do we need that? We we have arbitration, we can negotiate, so why do we need this extra thing? And so it wasn't very well. It was kind of a one-sided initiative. The other side felt it was kind of pushed on them. And that didn't really work well, because then you have one side thinking, why are these guys and girls coming on the projects? They don't feel to talk to them. They're not open. And then it becomes a difficult kind of awkward process. So I've seen that. And then that has to do with expectation management and both sides actually, liking to have a dispute board. And others where another experience I had is where we just never had a dispute, right? And on the one hand, I was a little frustrated because it was a big project, and it took a couple of years, And so, and there was an early one that I did, and it's like, well, let's see if we can resolve some issues here. But I think our role, actually, I started looking at it later on as a success, because we went over several issues that could have become a big deal. But by being there every couple of months, by talking them through, we got all the meeting notes from all the the meetings they had, and we kind of asked questions about, hey, what's this issue? Has it been resolved? Yeah, that has been resolved. And what about that? Yeah, we're still working on that. But probably by the next site visit, we'll have that resolved too. So we didn't have to decide anything, which I think I was a little frustrated at the time, because I wanted to, be like an adjudicator. But I guess our skills as mediators resolved it all. So.
Augusto.
Yes, from my part, the bad experience was not a ruin or a big problem, but was very exhaustive as a board member. Was in a DB where the parties both had a small team of a very small, tiny team of lawyers, internal lawyers. So in each problem that we had, they usually to hire external lawyers, but different officers at each time. So it's very exhausting, because you have to know the lawyers and starting, educating most of the colleagues on this new practice. So we spent a lot of time on that, and so it harmed a bit the collaborative process. But in the end, everything ended up very fine. And from about the good experience, I'm lucky enough to go through to good experiences in DBs in Peru with very experienced colleagues in DBs, and in one of them we are having a very interesting experience in the prevention side, because we had very collaborative parties that they truly trust in the board. So we are able to invest hours in building those solutions for the problems, and up to now we've been able to avoid all the disputes. One or two submissions that finally end up coming to the board, we managed to restart conversations and negotiations and to avoid disputes. So up to now, 0 submissions. That's very nice to have this experience, right?
Once again, we are on time. So once again, I would like to thank Peter and Augusto for sharing their experiences with us today. I would like to thank you all for your presence here, for your audience. And I remember that this panel, as well as all the others from the series, it has been recorded and will be available on BRBF's channel in YouTube. So go there to check, and if you want, you can rewatch this debate as well as the others. So bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.